feeling like there's a whole sitcom cast living rent-free in your head, especially, when your relationship's on the screen.
Huh?
One minute it's all like rom-com vibes. Then suddenly some inner heckler just shouts, "Are you sure about this one?"
Oh, yeah, that voice.
Well, today we're diving headfirst into that internal chaos. Think of it maybe as your personal Simpsons syndrome, and we're going to use it to get a better grip on relationship obsessive compulsive disorder
So,
or ROCD.
okay, let's unpack this. This idea of an inner Springfield is quite clever, actually. Each character is sort of embodying these deep-seated patterns or schemas.
Right.
That's a really smart way to visualize what's going on when we're navigating, the complexities of a relationship.
For sure.
Now, look, everyone has doubts.
Yeah.
Everyone has worries in romance. That's completely normal. But with ROCD, these become, well, relentless. Distressing thoughts, compulsive behaviors, all laser focused on the relationship itself, or maybe your partner.
Exactly. And yeah, we're not handing out diagnoses here, obviously, but we are offering maybe a shortcut, a way to understand that internal racket, especially when it's causing real pain. We'll be exploring how these inner characters, these schemas, as the author puts it, can show up specifically in our OCD. We'll draw on, the practical tools of CBT, ACT, mindfulness.
Yeah, and what's compelling here, I think, is how this playful metaphor, this Simpsons idea, can actually make these often confusing psychological patterns feel much more real, more manageable, maybe.
Totally. More graspable.
Absolutely. So let's flesh out this inner Springfield a bit more. We're talking about these ingrained ways of thinking, feeling, acting schemas, right?
Yeah.
That we've developed over time.
Yeah.
They're shaped by our life experiences, our history, and they really color how we respond to everything. Daily stress, our closest relationships, everything.
Right. And these characters, they aren't just pulled out of a hat, are they? They represent these core emotional beliefs, these rules we kind of live by, often stemming from, repeated experiences, especially early on.
Exactly. Someone who grew up with constant criticism, for instance,
Yeah.
well, they might have a very active inner critic character in their Springfield,
Oh, okay.
driven by maybe a defectiveness schema, that core feeling of not being good enough.
That makes sense.
And it's a very personalized cast, too. You won't find an exact duplicate in anyone else's head. The author gives us some helpful archetypes, though, like the ever-judging inner critic, the pleaser who's terrified of abandonment, the rebellious Bart, maybe an emotionally shut down, numb out part, and hopefully somewhere in there, that observing, grounded, wise self. It's dynamic, an inner ecosystem.
That's a really crucial point. It's about recognizing the types of patterns, isn't it? Not just sticking labels on ourselves.
Precisely.
And when we bring ROCD into this whole picture, well, we start to see how specific characters can really dominate that relationship narrative inside our heads.
Yeah, they take center stage.
So let's put some of these Springfield residents into the relationship spotlight. How does ROCD actually, play out through them?
Well, a really common way ROCD shows up is through this relentless stream of doubts, right? These intrusive questions about the relationship. Is this the right person? Am I truly happy? Is this feeling real enough?
Yeah, the constant questioning.
Exactly. And this often looks like an overactive, overthinking Springfield resident, maybe a kind of Lisa mode that's just constantly analyzing, dissecting the relationship.
Ah, the analyzer.
Yeah, this character just relentlessly searches for evidence for and against, trying to validate or invalidate the relationship. It just leaves you feeling perpetually uncertain. And often, this seems to stem from a deep-seated fear of vulnerability, making genuine connection feel inherently risky.
So this inner Lisa is just constantly crunching the data, making those endless pros and cons lists about the relationship, but never quite reaching a satisfying conclusion.
Right, that's a great way to put it, yeah. Never quite satisfied.
And then there's that other thing, that intense pressure some people feel to have the perfect relationship or find the perfect, flawless partner. Where does that fit in?
That perfectionism, that really resonates with another aspect of that same Lisa mode, actually. That drive for high achievement, maybe. And a real fear of not measuring up.
Okay.
In ROCD, this translates into this intense yearning for an idealized version of romance, and a partner who ticks every single box on some often completely unrealistic mental checklist.
Yeah.
It's this constant striving for an unattainable ideal.
Wow, that pressure to live up to some kind of fairy tale. Okay, now what about the person in the relationship who feels like they carry this heavy weight, like all the responsibility for making it work, for constantly ensuring the relationship's stability?
Well, that sounds very much like a Marge mode stepping forward.
Okay, Marge mode.
Yeah. Just as Marge often feels responsible for keeping the whole Simpson family afloat, Someone with ROCD might feel this um, overwhelming need to ensure the relationship's well-being.
Right.
They might constantly try to anticipate problems, prevent issues, always checking in on the partner's happiness,
Mm.
often at the expense of their own needs, their own boundaries.
I can see that this constant need to sort of nurture and maybe control the situation a bit.
Mm, exactly. Control the potential for things to go wrong.
And then you have the anxieties about not being good enough for your partner, that deep-seated fear of rejection, which Springfield character takes center stage them.
That's often where a Ned mode emerges, the quintessential people pleaser.
Oh, at Flanders,
Yeah.
okay.
Fueled by those fears of inadequacy, maybe abandonment. This character will constantly seek reassurance, validation from the partner. It's this relentless need for external approval just to temporarily soothe those ROCD anxieties.
The constant asking, are we okay? Do you still love me? That kind of thing. Fishing for compliments. Yeah, that paints a clear picture.
Precisely.
Now, ROCD, as you said, creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of distress. How might someone try to cope with that inner turmoil? What do the characters do?
Well, the distress caused by these ROCD thoughts often leads to compulsions, right? These repetitive behaviors aimed at reducing that anxiety. Through our inner Springfield lens, these compulsions can be seen as these avoidant residents, maybe like a Bart or even a crusty mode, just trying to escape the discomfort.
Trying to get out of feeling bad.
Exactly. These behaviors might include things like mentally reviewing past interactions over and over,
Oh, yeah.
constantly seeking reassurance from their partner or friend, or maybe obsessively comparing their relationship to others they see online or in real life.
So these characters, these patterns, they're not just random noise, are they? There's like a deeper engine driving them. The author talks about underlying schemas fueling these roles.
Precisely. That's the key link. These characters and the ROCD patterns they drive were often rooted in those deeper schemas, things like a core belief of being defective, like we mentioned, or a profound fear of being abandoned, or maybe a sense of emotional deprivation, feeling like your needs won't ever truly be met.
Wow.
These ingrained beliefs, often formed from early experiences, have such a powerful influence on our relationship beliefs and anxieties later on. For instance, someone with an abandonment schema might find their inner pleaser, their Ned mode, constantly working overtime in their relationship, trying to prevent that feared outcome.
Okay. Okay. So if we can start to identify these characters, our Marge, our Lisa, our Ned, and maybe the schemas behind them, what can we actually do about our own ROCD Springfield? How do we begin to manage this inner chaos?
Right. This is where the practical tools come in. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is really handy here.
Okay, CDT.
CBT helps you start to challenge the ingrained thought patterns, the scripts of those ROCD-driven characters. So if that inner critic, that Lisa mode, is constantly broadcasting, this isn't good enough, something's wrong here, CBT provides strategies to actually examine the evidence for that thought.
Like really look at it.
Yeah. Explore more balanced, more realistic perspectives. It's about learning to question the validity of those automatic negative thoughts, not just accepting them as fact.
So it's almost like having a rational conversation with that inner critic, asking for the proof instead of just buying the judgment wholesale.
Exactly. You're not arguing necessarily, but you're investigating. And what about exposure and response prevention, ERP? That's a big one for OCD.
Right, ERP. How does that fit the Springfield model?
ERP, which is really a cornerstone of CBT for OCD, can be understood here as gradually facing the situations, the thoughts, the feelings that trigger that ROCD anxiety, but without engaging in those usual compulsive character behaviors.
Okay, so facing the fear without doing the usual escape move.
Precisely. So if the urge to constantly seek reassurance, the Ned mode urge, pops up really strong, ERP would involve intentionally resisting that urge,
Like-
learning to sit with the anxiety, tolerate the discomfort that comes up.
Oof.
Yeah. It's about showing yourself through experience that you can handle the discomfort without resorting to those rituals that only provide temporary relief anyway.
That sounds like telling your inner Ned, okay, I hear you're worried, buddy, but we're not going to ask for reassurance right now. We're just going to see what happens. That takes some real courage.
It really does. And that's why another approach, acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, can be so valuable alongside CBT, or even on its own.
ACT, okay.
Yeah.
How does that work?
ACT focuses less on changing the thoughts directly and more on unhooking from them, recognizing those distressing ROCD thoughts as just, well, thoughts, mental events, not necessarily facts or commands you have to obey.
Like clouds passing by.
Kind of, yeah. And then shifting your focus towards taking actions in your relationship that align with your core values, what really matters to you, even when that inner Springfield is at its loudest and most chaotic.
Ah,
So
okay.
even if your inner Bart is screaming to avoid the anxiety to run away, ACT encourages you to keep moving, however small the step, in the direction of the kind of partner you want to be, the kind of relationship you want to build.
So it's less about trying to silence all the inner noise, maybe, and more about choosing how you want to act despite it.
Exactly. Choosing your actions based on values, not just based on avoiding discomfort.
And the book also highlights mindfulness, right? How does that fit into managing our inner Springfield?
Yeah, mindfulness is key here. It offers you the ability to just step back and simply observe the entire inner Springfield show,
Hmm.
including those ROCD thoughts, the urges, the emotions, just watching them without getting tangled up in them, without judging them. It's like activating that wise self perspective.
You calm observer.
Exactly. Calmly watching the play unfold on the inner stage, noticing each character, their lines, their antics, without getting pulled into the drama yourself. This creates this crucial bit of space between you and those reactive patterns.
That sounds really helpful. Creating a little distance from the inner whirlwind. Now, dealing with the constant distress of ROCD, I mean, it sounds incredibly draining. The
Well,
author emphasizes self-compassion quite a bit.
oh, absolutely vital. Self-compassion. It's about treating yourself with the same kindness, the same understanding you'd offer a good friend who is going through something really difficult.
Instead of beating yourself up for having the thoughts.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging the very real pain of ROCD without adding extra layers of self-criticism or judgment. Why am I thinking this again?
Yeah.
The author connects self-compassion to building a more secure, stable sense of self, like building a secure attachment with yourself, which in turn can foster more secure attachments in your relationships with others. It's about offering yourself some much-needed warmth and acceptance right in the middle of the struggle.
So being gentle with yourself amidst all that internal noise that really resonates. The book also touches on workability in relationships affected by ROCD. What does that mean in this context?
Yeah, workability is a core concept in ACT. It refers to behaviors that move you towards your values and a more meaningful life, as opposed to unworkable behaviors that are primarily driven by trying to avoid pain or discomfort.
Towards versus away moves.
Exactly. So in the context of ROCD, those compulsive behaviors like constantly seeking reassurance or mentally checking your feelings or comparing, those are often away moves.
Hmm.
They're attempts to escape the anxiety, but they don't actually build the relationship you want. They often make things worse in the long run.
Right.
So the goal is to identify those away moves and consciously practice towards moves, behaviors that are actually in line with your relationship values, like being fully present with your partner, even if you feel anxious, or initiating a shared activity you both value, or expressing appreciation, even when those ROCD thoughts are buzzing around.
So maybe an away move is constantly asking, do you really love me?
Hmm.
And a towards move might be, I don't know, initiating a hug or planning a date night, even while feeling uncertain inside.
That's a perfect example. Yes.
Yeah.
Shifting the focus from trying to eliminate the thoughts or feelings to actively building the kind of relationship you truly want, one value-guided action at a time.
That makes a lot of sense. And what happens when conflict arises? Because conflict happens in all relationships, but I imagine ROCD can really pour gasoline on that fire.
Oh, absolutely. ROCD can definitely amplify conflict through all those judgmental thoughts, those unhelpful patterns we've been discussing. That inner critic goes into overdrive.
Right.
The book suggests a helpful strategy,
Yeah.
naming the story, consciously recognizing those thoughts, as stories your mind is telling you. Maybe saying to yourself, okay, I'm having the thought that my partner doesn't care, rather than just believing it as absolute truth.
Creating that space again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It also highlights a really important distinction, especially in conflict, the difference between needing to be right in an argument and choosing to be loving,
Ooh, that's a big one.
isn't it? Often prioritizing connection, trying to understand your partner's experience, validating their feelings, even if you don't agree with their perspective, is far more valuable, far more workable than winning an argument fueled by ROCD anxieties and judgments.
Being right versus being loving. Wow. Okay. So to kind of bring it all together then, it really sounds like ROCD can be understood maybe more helpfully through this inner Springfield metaphor,
Hmm.
with these distinct, almost cartoonish Simpsons-like characters embodying those unhelpful thought patterns, those behavior loops,
Mhm.
which are often rooted in those deeper underlying schemas.
Precisely. Gives you handles, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And practical approaches like CBT and ACT and mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
they offer a really valuable toolkit.
Mm.
Tools for learning to manage these inner characters, maybe challenge their familiar scripts, and ultimately move towards a more workable, value-driven, and hopefully fulfilling relationship.
So for you listening right now, maybe take a moment to consider your own inner Springfield. Can you identify any of those ROCD-like patterns, or maybe some dominant characters, an overly critical Lisa, perhaps, or an anxious Marge, or a reassurance-seeking Ned that might be influencing your relationships?
And look, if any of this deep dive has struck a chord, if it resonates with you, please remember that exploring these ideas further, looking into CBT and ACT principles, and maybe seeking guidance from qualified therapists who specialize in OCD and relationship issues can be incredibly supportive steps in navigating ROCD. You don't have to manage that Springfield alone.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought for you to maybe mull over. How might gaining this deeper understanding of your own unique inner Springfield and the roles these different characters play actually empower you to start consciously rewriting those relationship scripts that just aren't serving you well anymore?